Well, thank you to all of you for staying around. My name is Robert Spiller. I'm a Senior Vice President with STV and am actually the Director for Smart Cities Nationwide. I want to tell you that this and the next session are the last two before the reception, and I guarantee they're going to be the best of the day. So just so you guys know, kudos to all of you for sticking around. No, seriously. Again, my name is Robert Spiller. I'm going to do my best to facilitate. I'm going to ask my participants, they're all distinguished speakers, to introduce yourselves, please.
Hello, everyone. I am Chase Klingensmith. I am the City of Pittsburgh's Autonomous Vehicles Policy Analyst.
I'm Danette Carl. I am an Innovation Project Manager at Port Authority of New York and New Jersey.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Burr Tweedy. I work at the New York Green Bank, which is a division of the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and I'm on the investment team there and focus on clean transportation.
And last but not least, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Mendez, Director of Freight Mobility at New York City Department of Transportation.
Well, welcome to all of you. Our panel is Rethinking the Future of Transportation. So guess what? The first question is about what does that future look like? So I want each of you just spend a few seconds and think about 2030 and 2030 beyond and tell me what you think the future of transportation is and what your agency or your community is doing about getting ready for that.
Well, for me, I would say in a word, it's multimodality. And in Pittsburgh, we've been making a lot of investments in bike infrastructure lately, and as well as that, the bike share with electric bikes. And I feel like electric bikes in particular are very useful. Pittsburgh is a very hilly city, and America in general is pretty spread out. So if we want to see a lot of this movement in cycling, especially cycling that links up with public transit, I think the particular investment in e-bikes is going to be a very worthwhile one to sort of see that growth in multimodality.
Great.
The future is electrified, and we are focusing on building out the electrification of the airports, the ports, World Trade Center campus, all the line departments that Port Authority oversees. And what we're doing to make sure that that happens, we have what we call the Innovation Hub, and that is an internal organization that funds pilot projects with all kinds of new technology to reach our tunnels, bridges, terminals, new bus terminal being built in several years, lots of opportunity.
Yeah, I would affirm what Danette said. The electrification of transportation is one of the major themes that we're focused on. And that means the deployment of electric vehicles to replace gasoline and diesel vehicles. It also means the build out of charging infrastructure, which is a totally new asset class and a very complicated asset to deploy and finance. So it's requiring new business models, new ways of thinking, new technology, and that's one area we're really focused. And then I'd also note just sort of the distribution of energy generation assets throughout the grid. We're moving from a central kind of power plant power flows down the transmission, down the distribution to your house type structure to generate electricity on your house, at your business, store electricity in the distribution grid, and some of those assets can be co-located with mobility assets, and that's part of the picture too.
Okay.
I agree with many of the other panelists as well. I think here in New York City, we're really thinking about sort of reimagining our streets and making sure we provide access for more sustainable modes of transportation, particularly within the freight space. We're reimagining sort of our broader supply chain network and sort of thinking about a broader vision for reducing our dependency on diesel based trucks for moving goods around the city, and that means shifting more freight to water, to rail, cleaning the ones that do remain here. So electrification, but also alternative fuels, because that is also sort of our way to get to help us bridge the gap between electrification and recognizing that the infrastructure may take a longer time to sort of get online, highlighting the grid capacity constraints and those issues.
So I want to hone in on this electrification and alternative fuels just a little bit. I'm going to ask Burr, though, for a second. Talk to us about financing of these things. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So there are a number of barriers to financing the electrification of transportation. So on the vehicle side, I'd highlight residual value. These are first generation vehicles. A lot of times we don't have secondary markets yet for the resale of the vehicles after their first kind of contract or their first lease. So for a lender or financier, there's a lot of risk associated with lending against the vehicles as collateral, which is one of the things we do. So that's a huge barrier. A way to overcome that is to use the multitude of incentives and public funds available to de-risk and buy down that upfront cost so that you're taking less residual value risk. There's also different financing structures where you could have a guarantee or a first loss type structure to help finance that and get around that risk. On the charging infrastructure side, utilization risk. So a lot of the business models we're seeing for charging deployment rely on unpredictable demand. And that's really tricky from a financing perspective, not knowing what the cash flow that project's going to make, and therefore not being able to really lend against those future cash flows. And on that side, a good strategy to overcome that barrier is to have some long-term contracted demand, have an anchor customer who's going to take at least some amount of power from that project.
Thank you. So Denise, I want to ask you, because you brought up fuels and going slow, why not just pull off the Band-Aid? Why not just say everybody needs to be electric next year?
Yeah, so I think the biggest issue that we found, and we're actually doing that work right now and doing the core planning to establish infrastructure, is that there are some needs that could be sort of well in the magnitude of powering thousands of homes for like heavy duty electrification when you think about freight. We are doing as much as we can to expand on-street charging for passenger vehicles, but particularly for freight and for the freight industry, we see some of the cost, a higher upfront cost of purchasing those vehicles, recognizing that some industry folks have existing fleets that it's harder for them to let go of, and so the salvage value as well. So we've expanded our clean truck program to help offset those costs. So those are sort of the two main areas, really infrastructure readiness and like how quickly can we get there, as well as the cost for ownership and sort of thinking about the different types of models that we can put forward.
Thank you. Danette and Chase, I want to talk to you guys. What are your communities or your agencies doing to help get ready for this brave new future of multimodalism and electrification that you guys are prognosticating that we're going to be seeing?
Innovation Hub, that internal organization. We're going into our third year here, and the iHub focuses on new technology in a pilot format. It could come from an employee at Port Authority. It could come from a whole department. They bring an idea, it's Shark Tank style. They pitch it to the execs, and they say yay or nay, or if they say nay, we just work with it until the pitch is just right and it's the right ask, the right time. And so we get to try out huge, new, innovative projects or small, brilliant basics kind of projects. So for example, we're looking at all kinds of charging infrastructure. For example, at the airports, you've got not just the passenger vehicles who want to charge, but you have your shuttles. The fleets are wanting to charge all at the same time, so we want to try inductive charging. Maybe that's going to solve waiting in line for a charging device. So you can charge while you're idling, you can charge while you're moving. There's mobile charging units. So there's so much tech out there, so much to choose from. The iHub, the innovative pilot nature allows us to test things out, try them, compare them. So it's really important in imagining the future of mobility to test and then share. Don't just test and keep your results to yourself, but let your internal and external agencies know what were the results of your pilot. How did it go?
Chase?
Well, for multimodality, we've been looking at how we can co-locate things by like the relative assets. So for instance, we have an express busway, and so near the entrance of that, we have bike rental. So if you use the bike or if you use the bus to get into a neighborhood where you want to link up with bikes, you can easily use that. And then we have separate infrastructure, so you don't have to worry about getting hit by a car when you do. And as far as electrification goes, We've been trying to lead by example. We switched over our fleet to electric Ford F-150s and Chevy Bolts. And by doing that, we've also focused on how we can build out our charging infrastructure, but in a way where it can be utilized by the public. And so we have a large parking lot that is located near a highway. And so that we actually got to go see sort of a 3D or a VR mock-up where they had gone through and designed, like, you put on the VR headset and you see what the plan is and how they have this distributed solar array that then feeds into the charging. So that's sort of like the combination that we've got going in Pittsburgh.
That's really great. So I heard innovation, supporting innovation by pilots, supporting innovation, leadership by example. So that's really great. What about automation? What do you guys think about automation? I mean, I was intrigued not to find anyone here say that the future was automated and, without drivers.
Yeah, it's
Anyone?
electrified and automated. So the future.
Oh, now you're going to change
Yeah, right.
okay, the
No, you
message.
misheard.
Okay.
So the iHub has tested out autonomous vehicles at JFK and at Newark in a phased approach. We started out with a pilot just seeing some AVs go in a loop formation. Then our next level was, can we platoon 3 of them 7 feet apart at 20 miles an hour? And we can, and they zip right by you. And 7 feet in person looks like nothing. They were so fast and so close together. And now we're trying it on mixed traffic roads. So we've got them in our parking lots going up on and integrating with traffic in the airport. So this phased approach of automation, testing, reporting back, seeing what works, and then growing from there is hugely important and effective.
Very good. Burr, what are you seeing in the finance world in terms of automation?
It's not really something that I've encountered much. So New York Green Bank is mainly a debt financer. So we're providing capital to commercially proven and scaled technologies mainly. Kind of the opposite end of like venture capital, where you're taking a bet on a new technology that might really have huge potential. But just from a pure finance perspective, lower costs could benefit a project if you have lower operating costs because you're able to operate autonomously, or if you're able to achieve higher utilization because you can run 24/7 or something like that. That would be a pro.
I think we often think about automation of the robo-taxi or whatever, but I think we forget about a lot of those routine exercises like moving vehicles around a maintenance facility, parking vehicles, bringing vehicles up and stuff that are easy automation from a risk perspective, right? Because you don't have a driver or a passenger often in those vehicles, but also freight. I mean, let's talk about automation and freight. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, obviously, like, the more controlled environment you have, you can sort of help to reduce the risk. Within New York City, like, our landscape is very dense, and sort of thinking about those challenges, there are layers of the automation. And so we're going to be seeing sort of progression to the 5 different levels of automation in general. As it relates to freight, there could be opportunities for like vessels in terms of the marine freight opportunities there. We're seeing countries like Norway and other cities making progress there. And so we actually released an RFEI for Blue Highways in early November, looking at encouraging more freight to come in by water. And we're looking for sustainable practices and advancements in technology in that space. I think we're seeing some of that activity already in freight in general, but how that sort of plays out in New York City is yet to be sort of understood in sort of the broader network in New York City. I think in controlled environments like airports and other areas where you can sort of program a lot of elements in there, it's a lot easier. But we're continuing to work on that through New York City's Connected Vehicles pilot program.
Right. Chase, do you want to add anything to that? I mean, you were talking about bicycles and electric bicycles earlier, and I think that has a role in the future of freight delivery as well, maybe.
Oh, certainly. I actually had put together a proposal recently on bike delivery that I actually came up with the idea for my last visit in New York City because of the UPS e-bikes that they have. And as I mentioned before, in Pittsburgh, we have these investments in bike infrastructure. So how can we move delivery buy-in towards that and have a powerful ally on that front? That's sort of been like my thinking on this, and one of the ways where I've been really trying to shift things. But yeah, we actually had a pilot with personal delivery devices in Pittsburgh. And I just wanted to second everything about the controlled environments and the phased approach, because those were two things that were hugely influential for us. But also one of the things we came away with is like really developing a good use case for it. Because the controlled environments, like, yeah, that's not our streets. And things are way too far apart in Pittsburgh. Like, we don't have the density that there is in New York. So the economic case might not be there. But you brought up airports. And airports, in terms of both delivery of food at your gate, but also there's the potential to really help out mechanics. Because let's say a mechanic forgets a tool as they go to work on a plane. If they can reroute a delivery device robot to go and get that tool and work on something else in the meantime and then have that robot bring it back, they can work that much more efficiently. So with that, there's also the question of like, how can you augment workers instead of replacing them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, rental cars. How many of us would get rid of that extra car if we could get a rental car delivered to us reasonably? And, I don't want to drive the driver back to his or her place of business just to have that rental car. That was the whole point in the first place.
You want the enterprise rent-a-car commercial from years ago where it's like
Exactly,
wrapped
but
up
I
in
want it
drive.
delivered to me without a driver in it. Denise, did you want to add something to that?
Actually, I was going to add to his point on sort of cargo bikes in general. So New York City DOT has, actually, we just passed our 5-year mark for launching the pilot program for cargo bikes. And right now, I think there are over 500 bikes in operation today in New York City delivering goods by cargo bike. We want to see more of that. And we're actually looking at regulations to support expanding the options for cargo bikes to operate on New York City streets. And we actually have the largest program in the nation. So really happy to see this take off and really help to complement sort of our reimagining of last mile deliveries in the city for more compatible types of devices or vehicles, depending on how you frame it, operating in our streets. I think the compatibility with sort of a truck versus a cargo bike obviously is the size and the scale, and so thinking about how to support sort of incentivizing those deliveries and helping to scale that, I think, is critical for us in the city.
Great. Anyone else want to get in on this?
Oh yeah, I just want to second the size factor. Pittsburgh is a city whose design predates the car. So the fact that we have delivery trucks operating on our streets doesn't really work. So like the closer we can get to vehicles that are the size of what our streets were designed for, I think the better we are. Because a lot of times with delivery trucks, they'll pull up onto the sidewalk. And like if you have somebody in a wheelchair, like are you just supposed to go around the block? Like there's a number of effects that we currently have with our status quo that we really need to address. And I think right-sizing delivery is a huge step in the right direction.
And there's only so much space on the ground, so you can look to the air to do some last mile delivery or mid-mile. Where right now the drone cargo looking more like last mile, but as we're looking really far into the future, these drones are going to be able to carry heavier and heavier cargo, and carry more of it and further.
Right. I work in downtown Austin, Texas, believe it or not. And you can order Chick-fil-A and have it delivered in a robot. Or you can order a variety of different restaurant deliverables and they'll come in a robot, come down the street. Now, they're still minded by a delivery nanny, as I call them, that follows on a scooter or a bike to make sure that it's working correctly. But I think
Harassing it.
or
To protect it. That's
yeah, from being
robot
harassed,
security.
right, or the food taken, yeah. But I think the point is that the future is at hand. It is really getting close. So today during the presentations, we also heard a lot about the digital networks in our communities, and we've heard the U.S. DOT talk about, the Secretary talk about how connectivity, the internet, is the last new transportation mode. I just would like to get y'all's opinion on that. The way I look at it is for years we've been talking about transportation demand management as an industry, and yet that trip is the trip that's discounted and no longer counted, which means we don't invest in that, right? And so I'd like your thoughts in terms of each of your sort of area of expertise, what your thoughts on that is, or might be. Why don't you start, Chase?
Sure.
I know you're passionate about this.
Yeah,
brother.
this is actually like a really close topic to me because when I started, we actually were looking at doing a pilot around an autonomous vehicle shuttle. And before I did anything, I did a listening tour with the people who would have been using it, as well as people who were experts on what would actually be necessary for it to work. And I came to the conclusion that we did not have that. And so in lieu of that, we ended up actually kind of shelving that proposal, but putting together a document that sort of outlined the conditions that we would need to meet before we tried this again. There had been a lot of interest in doing a shuttle in the past, and it kind of got to be a hairy topic because of the approach that it was taken the first time over. So it became a sensitive topic, but it was also one where I felt like we had an opportunity to use it towards leverage to talk about digital infrastructure. Because one of the major hindrances, or one of the major hurdles that we would have had to clear was the fact that nothing was connected. We didn't have the bandwidth to support it. So we really kind of went to using these things that people want. It's like a shiny object that people want. So how can you use that as leverage to have a discussion about digital infrastructure? Because you can't get there without also building up broadband. And broadband is largely like the backbone for everything. So you can do this several times over. So I think there's like a lot to be said about having a more holistic conversation where you kind of dangle that shiny object to get to that discussion about broadband. Because Pennsylvania, I mean, I'm speaking for us here, we're way behind on that. And thankfully, we're making steps towards it. But it always helps if you have something like that to sort of sell people on it further down the line as like a use case for why you need to make that investment now.
Right. Danette?
Yep, interconnectedness, it's got to be the fiber optic cable. Let's make it accessible and free and quick for everyone.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on this topic. So first of all, just in terms of my day job, the telematics that are available from new models of electric vehicles allow for a new level of asset management that wasn't possible before. You can track these vehicles in real time, track their mileage, track performance statistics. So that's just enables a new level of insight into these vehicles that we're collateralizing our loan with. From more of a future perspective, the interconnectivity of energy resources will enable new business models and kind of strategies, like, for example, vehicle to grid, where you use the battery of an electric vehicle to provide grid services. That kind of service wouldn't be possible without the communication between the asset, the grid, and whatever management software is in between. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities there.
Yeah, I'll just add that sort of the digital infrastructure and roadside infrastructure are going to be critically important for the smart cities of the future. And so thinking about all the V2X technologies and the fact that I think at this point we're commercially 6.0 is going to be available commercially by 6G, is going to be available commercially by 2030. We're seeing so much advancements there, and so there's opportunity to optimize routes, optimize signal infrastructure, better communication V2V, as well as vehicle to infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and so seeing the synergies and maybe opportunities for better partnerships on the technology side, as well as managing our assets and our infrastructure too.
Right. Before I came to STV, I actually ran the City of Austin Transportation Department. And one of the things I noticed towards the end of my career there was that digital infrastructure was being funded from different silos than transportation. And it wasn't until we started to make the connection that, you can't have demand management if you don't have the infrastructure to support folks working from home, for instance, that we were then able to use transportation dollars to purchase a duct system in downtown where we could actually put fiber optic and increase the capacity. In Texas, we typically think of it as warm weather, but as of late with climate change, we're having snowpocalypse during the winter in February, and we lost our grid last year for about 2 or 3 days, literally. And it was interesting to see who was resilient and who wasn't, and who was able to work from home even after we got the electricity. and who wasn't in terms of equity. One school district was having to put hotspots on school buses and go park them out in neighborhoods so that certain neighborhoods could actually have connectivity. Ingenious, smart city, yes. Embarrassing as the most wired city in the world, yes. All of those things. And so as we start to think about digital infrastructure, I think we have a wonderful opportunity to make it a transportation infrastructure in addition to a digital infrastructure so that we can start to mix those funds and actually achieve that transportation demand management that we've been counting on for years so we don't have to build the infrastructure to the levels that we otherwise would. So we have a few more minutes. Would any of you like to have a last word? You're welcome to.
I wanted to touch on eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing.
Yes,
So
thank you.
They'll be over at airports probably sooner rather than later, and that's going to add to the draw from the grid. Airports are really going to be like their own power grids because everything's just going to be pulling from them. But with these challenges, shift your perspective and think of them as opportunities. Maybe we're using things that are plugged in. People are parking for days while they're off on their vacation, use their vehicles as a battery backup when the grid needs that. So, working together to make overcome these challenges.
That distributed storage that Burr, you were talking about. Any other thoughts? Thank you for bringing that third dimension up and down as opposed
Take
to
us
just
into the air.
horizontal. Yeah, thank you.
I would just like to kind of highlight this is a really unique moment in the transition of the transportation space. There's really aggressive policy around the country, including in New York, where we have a goal for every school bus on the road to be clean by 2035 and a goal in the city for all rideshare to be clean by, I think, 2030. So the momentum's there, and there's also a ton of public money available from state incentives, from federal tax credits. So this is the time to put money to work and do stuff.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, so one, I think we need to throw sort of everything at this sort of broader challenge for decarbonization and making sure that we're not just focused on electrification, but what are the other steps that we can do to get to sort of the broader sustainability goals. And then two, from a public sector perspective, we know that the solution is with the industry and with the private sector, so there needs to be more opportunities for private sector engagement. The last point I should say is land use and zoning has a critical part to play in sort of induced demand and thinking about how we think about those policies and how that could impact sort of mobility and transportation. So that's it.
It's all connected, right?
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to say. I was going to say there's a huge importance to realizing the holistic nature of a lot of things, how interconnected things are, and I mean, even on an interpersonal level, how important communication is. One thing that we run into on a lot of these topics is how often people either want to do the same thing and don't talk about it, or are doing the same thing and aren't talking about it. So yeah, talk with your coworkers. I think there's a tremendous amount of value in just hanging out and talking with people about some of these things, whether they're coworkers in your department or like a similar department or even outside a city. Like, for instance, like these Infra Day events have been tremendously valuable for me from Pittsburgh, just for getting exposure to a lot of these different ideas and like what's going on in different cities. And yeah, so far, I already know I'm going back with a bunch of things.
Yeah, actually, and I was going to plug Infra Day, so thank you, Ken. This has been a wonderful session. I want to thank all of my participants here. I want to thank all of you all for sticking around. There's one more, so stay here.
Thank you.